Well, it wasn't lobbying for sure. It was some sort of a connotation, commotion, behind the scenes, trying to find access with the shortcuts, which were very unnecessary.
All right, Justina, let's go to our panel. Andrew Pierce, you've been covering politics for just as long as I have. There are very few things that shock me in politics, but some of what's come out over the past few days genuinely has. Is it lobbying, or is it a different word that we should be using?
Well, I think this doesn't pass the smell test, what David Cameron did, without a doubt, Ian. This is a former Prime Minister, no less, a former Prime Minister using his very privileged contacts book to lobby the Chancellor of the Exchequer, other ministers, political advisors in Downing Street, bullying almost or persuading the Secretary of State for Health to meet this guy, Lex Greensill. Now, on the one hand, you can argue he was doing this because a company was in danger of going bust. He was trying to get government loans to support it, trying to protect jobs going under. But he was also trying to protect a company, if it went under, was going to rob him of a payday of between, we think, 45 to 60 million pounds. Now, that's a payday that would make even Tony Blair embarrassed and jealous of, because he's done very well out of his contacts book since he left Number 10. I think it doesn't pass the smell test. It's shameful. Cameron should be ashamed. I think his reputation has been dealt a grievous blow, and I don't think he's going to recover from it. And I don't know if I would call it lobbying, but it's been going on for years and years. Caroline Lucas was in Brussels. She knows there's a huge lobbying industry going on at Brussels, in Strasbourg, across the political spectrum, across the whole world in Europe. But it feels a bit like a form of, in a sense, selling yourself, selling your contacts book, selling your access, selling your knowledge to the highest bidder. And how this senior civil servant, which we discovered yesterday, was allowed to operate as a civil servant for 2 months while going on the books of a lobbying company and not have to declare it is beggars belief.
OK, Caroline Lucas, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with lobbying. If you want to see a law change, there's no reason why anybody shouldn't try and persuade a politician that the law should be changed. What has happened here that is different from the way lobbying either normally is carried out or should be carried out?
I think Andrew's pointed his finger at it, really, which was that David Cameron stood to make a huge amount of personal gain from doing this. So already the whole thing was not just like another MP, lobbying for the good of a company in their constituency, which is something that MPs do all the time. This was something where he stood to gain personally, as we've just heard, millions of pounds. And I think it's around the transparency that there's still a problem. I mean, it's interesting that Cameron has claimed that he hasn't broken any rules, and he probably is right. But in a sense, that makes it even more shocking, because we warned right back in 2014, when this Lobbying and Transparency Act was first brought in, that if you're going to have a massive, great loophole, in other words, if that bill doesn't apply to in-house lobbyists, then you're just leaving out the vast majority of lobbyists. Most lobbyists don't work for a lobbying firm. They work in companies for whom they are lobbying. So the whole thing stinks. I think in terms of Cameron's reputation, I think the idea that he kept quiet for 40 days and then just slipped this out just very shortly after the Duke of Edinburgh's death left an even worse taste, in a sense, this just trying to bury bad news. I think he's sort of covered himself in shame, and he must know it, given that he was the one, when he was opposition leader, saying that this is the next big scandal to break. Well, he's absolutely right, and that's why we need not just the inquiry to be led by a friend of the Conservative Party, but we need a properly independent inquiry. I'd be happy with the select committee that the Labour Party suggested in the motion today. But it needs to go much further than just the chain of events around David Cameron. I think we need to look again at that piece of legislation, which is supposed to guarantee an element of transparency, because it clearly isn't working.
Dave Ward, you, as a General Secretary of a trade union, you are a lobbyist, aren't you?
Yeah, we are, but we're doing it a very transparent way. We have to produce all the funds that we spend politically. We're regulated more than any other organisation in the UK. and our members have a democratic vote as to whether or not they want to be in our political fund and whether the union actually has a political fund. So, yeah, we do it. But this is not lobbying. It's not cronyism. It's not sleaze, as I've heard it referred to today. This is an abuse of power. And I think it goes to the heart of what I see personally as the biggest overarching challenge that we face in this country and possibly across the world. And that is that there is a deep-rooted imbalance, structural imbalance of power and wealth in the world of work, in how we operate the economy, and in wider society. And actually, I think it supports, in the way the system operates, far more than what David Cameron has done here. You know, I mean, I think it supports companies that are able to make unbelievable fortunes without giving anything back to society. I think it supports, in an indirect way, racism. I think it supports the sort of inequalities that we're seeing, that, in my view, are at the worst level that I've seen in my life.
Could you not argue, though, and I'm playing devil's advocate here slightly, but could you not argue that David Cameron was texting people that he knew within government, trying to bring influence on them? It didn't work because they didn't do what he wanted them to do. So you could argue that the system actually did work in this case. And I mean, are you seriously telling me that if your best mate among Labour MPs became Secretary of State of Employment, that you would feel any qualms at all about texting them to say, right, I'd quite like you to change this law, whoever?
No, I wouldn't do it in that way. I would do it very publicly.
You wouldn't now, but I think you might have done before.
Do it before. No, well, you're wrong here on that. You obviously don't understand how trade unions do operate with lobbying.
Well, I think I understand how they used to. Whether they do now or not is a different matter.
I'm telling you how we operate in that. If you can find anybody who's got a text from me in amongst Labour MPs saying that, then bring them on.
No, I certainly can't do that. And anyway, let's go to Faye Jones. Now, Faye, it's sort of 3 against 1 here, so I get that you're on a bit of a losing wicket. But can you mount any defence of David Cameron's behaviour?
I'm glad you used the word wicket there. I was worried that we were going to talk about the scandal in cricket of changing wickets to out. But anyway, we can just debate that later on. You know, being completely truthful, I don't like the sound of this either. You know, I think the former Prime Minister will have some serious questions to answer, and so he should. And I think it's right that the government is coming forward with an independent review, and I think that's crucial. I mean, Caroline mentioned the select committee that the Labour Party proposed to establish. And I voted against that because I don't want MPs marking their own homework, because both sides could be politically motivated. You could have a bunch of Tory stooges doing what the whips want them to do, and you could have Labour MPs who just want, certainly not, you could have Labour MPs wanting to chuck mud at us. So, you know, what's important is that we get to the bottom of this, and that is what the Prime Minister
how independent, though, is this inquiry that the Prime Minister has convened? Because the guy that's going to be chairing it, Nigel Boardman, I don't know him, I don't know much about him, apart from the fact that he is a non-executive director of the Bays Department. Now, you could argue that, well, that's a good thing because he will know how that department operates, but on the other hand, it could be like the Priti Patel inquiry, where it comes up with conclusions which the Prime Minister then completely ignores.
Well, I think what's important is that he's got experience in these types of procurement and supply chain finance issues, and that's really, really important. And also the Prime Minister is committed to giving him ultimate access, not just to documents, but to people. The Prime Minister said today he's going to have carte blanche. So what's important is that this gentleman carrying out this review is independent, but has access to everything and everyone he's going to need to speak to get to the bottom of this. Because, you know, Justina's question is absolutely right. Asking about lobbying is really important. I'm a former lobbyist. I've worked for an in-house team, and I've worked for a consultancy, and we are heavily regulated in those industries. You have to be ultimately transparent about who your clients are, and anything that gives lobbying a bad name.
Who are you lobbying? What was your main thing?
I worked for the National Farmers Union for 4 years, both in Westminster and in Brussels.
And did you ever text somebody to say, wouldn't mind if you sort of made this little speech here or this speech there, asked this question?
No, I mean, we would have written to them in an appropriate way to ask, would you be prepared to talk about this issue that's really important to our members? But, let's not do down lobbying here. Let's look at the transparency. Let's look at the way in which it's done. Because as Dave says, pressing members of parliament is extremely important. People need to hear views. I mean, everybody lobbies, the Women's Institute lobbies, and we need to make sure that we have a free and open method of doing that, but one that is tightly controlled. And, I do think the former Prime Minister will have some questions to answer over whether he lived up to that.
I think everyone would obey what the Women's Institute wants.
Quite right.
Tony Blair,
to declare an interest, I am a Women's Institute member.
Are you really? You're far too young.
I am. I am.
Oh God, I'm going to get lots of tweets about that, aren't I? Justine, a very quick reaction to what you've heard.
I'm really pleased to hear that every single person that answered the question has confirmed that actually what has happened is very far from lobbying. It is a very heavily regulated industry, and it should be, rightly so, because it is so potentially prominent influence into the politics. So the regulation is absolutely necessary, and what happened there was an abuse of power, and that's all really.
Thank you very much indeed, Justine. And we'll come to more of your questions in a minute to our panel. It's 21 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Last Question with Ian Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:24. Dave Ward, Caroline Lucas, Faye Jones and Andrew Pearce with me taking your calls. The next caller is Mike in Bridgend in South Wales. Mike, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to ask, with the interview that's just happened with Alex Salmond, did Alex Salmond's lack of apparent preference between Biden or Putin just take your breath away like it just did mine during that interview?
Right. I don't know how many of you were listening to the interview that I just did with Alex Salmond. You're all nodding, so that's good. Caroline Lucas, what did you make of that particular answer?
Well, Faye and I were just kind of looking at one another as we were kind of waiting in the, whatever you call it, the anteroom, I guess, just absolutely gobsmacked, just thinking we want to get in on that conversation and say, this is not a
now's your chance.
Never mind our interview, that one sounded more interesting. No, I mean, even when you pushed him, he would not say that that he would prefer the politics of President Biden over the politics of President Putin. And I mean, I thought it was a very fair interview. I thought that you gave him ample chance to respond and allowed him to make the case that his program was not the same as RT, but also the case that by having his program on RT, he is of course giving support to the Russian regime behind it. It is. I just think he's lost it, and it's such a shame because, he was once a very decent politician, I think.
Faye.
Yeah, Caroline is absolutely right. We were aghast listening in. That's a no-brainer of a question for me. But I guess Mr. Salmond doesn't want to offend his bosses. I don't know why that would be a difficult one for him to answer. It certainly isn't for me. I don't know. Mr. Salmond and our politics are wildly far apart. But I agree with Caroline that it is very sad to see someone in such a position. It seems that the new political party that he's founded is purely a personal vendetta against his former party. And it just seems a terrible shame that a once great political career is ending in this way. I may be wrong, and the polls will prove me wrong. But I saw the Robert the Bruce advert this week and thought, who on earth is advising Alba? This is strange, very strange. But yeah, it's a no-brainer. It really did take my breath away when I heard that.
Andrew, I'm sure you've had many encounters with Alex Salmond over the years. I presented a weekly phone-in show with him on LBC for, I think, a year or two. And I'd known him a bit before that, and I've always had a very high opinion of his political abilities. I think, like everybody, he has his flaws, and some of those have been apparent. But when I heard that he was joining RT, I mean, as I said to him in the interview, I said a little bit of me died because I thought I can't not condemn this. There is no defence for this, and I just wonder what the voters in Scotland are going to make of it, of those answers, not just to that particular question, but the other three questions I put to him on Russian issues, none of which he could answer.
It would have been shocking if he struggled to say whether he preferred the politics of Donald Trump versus Putin, because Trump was a monster, of course, but Putin is a bigger monster. Every organisation of any repute, from NATO to the European Union, said that the Kremlin orchestrated the Novichok poisoning in Salisbury, an attempt to kill people on British soil. We know that the Kremlin was behind the murder of Litvinenko on British soil. One of the so-called assassins is now an MP in Putin's party. He is a bad man. He's an international bandit. And it is shocking, frankly, that a man who wants to take Scotland into an independent, brave new future can't bring himself to say just that. And whatever you think about Joe Biden, he's ultimately very decent. Even if you don't admire his politics, he's a decent guy. And I think it must be, as Caroline and Faye said, because he's getting a regular check from RT. I can't think of any other reason. And Caroline's right. Okay. He's a decent politician.
Dave Ward.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite clear that he wanted to avoid the question. And the answer is very simple. It's Joe Biden. Any decent person would come to that conclusion, given some of the things that we've seen happening in Russia that have been spoken about. I do think that, I wouldn't write off everything that Russia does, though, in terms of a country and the people in it. Because the leader,
the people are very different from a government, aren't they? We all know that.
So at times, you kind of feel a lot of sympathy for people in Russia and the lack of democracy, and you want that to change. Look, I didn't hear, to be honest with you, Ian, I didn't hear all the context of your previous discussion with him. I came in halfway through and just picked up that one question.
Well, Dave, the beauty of the modern day technology is that you can go back and watch it on Global Player or the YouTube channel. So, but maybe not just yet. Maybe after we've finished. More of your calls and questions to our panel in just a moment. But let's quickly get a word from Mike in Bridgend. Have you got anything to add, Mike?
Oh, yeah. Well, just that he's pro-LGBT rights in Scotland, but seems to love Russia, whereby if you try and practice kind of just basic kind of...
Good point.
You'll get stamped on.
Yeah, you see that?
Ian, can I just...
I really wish I hadn't come back to you, Mike, now, because you've said something that I should have put to him in that interview. That's the thing when you interview somebody like that. You're always thinking, oh, damn, I should have asked that. Faye?
I was just going to say another answer I hated from Mr. Salmond was his answer on women. There was absolutely no contrition, no regret, nothing. I appreciate he was found not guilty, but, I just was staggered by that attitude that he wouldn't acknowledge. He has talked about mistakes he's made in the past, and apologising there's no shame in that. Moving on and apologising, there is no shame in that.
OK, let's get the news headlines. It's 8:31. Here's Serena Farrow.
A powerful Commons committee has announced its own investigation into the collapse of Greensill Capital. The government's seen off an attempt by Labour for a full parliamentary inquiry into political lobbying. A former police officer who shot an unarmed black man in Minnesota is to be charged with manslaughter. 20-year-old Dante Wright died on Sunday, sparking violent protests in a suburb of Minneapolis. More than 1,000 jobs are at risk as part of plans to close in-store bakeries at Asda. The supermarket says it will try to move staff into alternative roles with redundancy as the last option. LBC weather, another dry and chilly night for many. A fairly widespread frost as well, with fog possible in the west. A low of -1 degree.
This is LBC.
Hey,
Cross Question with Ian Dale on LBC.
8:36 on LBC. Now, you may notice we started this a little bit late because my interview with Alex Salmond overran. I think you all understand why that was. So we're going to extend Cross Question to 9:15. Let me reintroduce my panel. Dave Ward is General Secretary of the Communications Workers Union, Caroline Lucas, Green MP for Brighton Pavilion, Faye Jones, Conservative MP for Brecon and Radnorshire, and Andrew Pearce, LBC presenter and Associate Editor of the Daily Mail, in that order. Right, let's go to your calls again. Darren is in Bromley. Hello, Darren.
Hi, good evening.
Hello, what would you like to ask?
So my question is, I'm hoping the panel have seen the recent media coverage with the British Gas fire and rehire. My question is, what do they think of Boris's handling of the recent fire and rehire at British Gas, when he could have made this process illegal and didn't? And just to put that in context, today they fired 10% of the service and breakdown engineers, and that's myself included. The workers that did accept this contract did it unwillingly. There was inducements, there was bullying, intimidation from managers, multiple text messages, and this is all from a company that made £901 million in 2019 and then increased that profit by 27% in the first 6 months of last year. The new CEO, Chris O'Shea, done the fire and rehire today, doubled his wages last year, and then 3 months later did the fire and rehire. So,
okay, Darren, let's put those questions to our panel. Dave Ward, I have to come to you first on this. This is British Airways writ large, isn't it?
I mean, Darren, I can't sort of express anything other than solidarity to you and all the workers that have been fired today. It's a disgraceful situation, and the government should make it illegal. You don't need to be lobbied to know that it's wrong. You need to do something about it. My worry is that it represents what I was talking about earlier on, another example of how the world of work has become very much against workers. There are so many examples we could talk about. I'm hoping Ian's going to invite me back on in a few weeks' time when he gets back in the studio to do a session that we've done before and talk about this in more detail.
We will indeed.
Yeah, and so can I say one of the things that strikes me about this imbalance of power and wealth is that, can you imagine workers, having a say in their company, in the running of their company, and having a vote where they said, well, we think the company are not doing their best. They're not able to look at the future in a way that builds our jobs, that protects the services, that offers innovation. So what we're going to do, we're going to vote that we sack the board, and we're not even going to rehire them. But if we do rehire them, we're going to make them accept less pay terms and conditions. These are the sort of issues that, unless this country puts this right, we're never going to see fairness in the world of work. We're never going to see an economy that operates in a way that everybody can see the benefits of that. So, I'm 100% with you. The CWU has done a lot of work in support of solidarity of the gas workers. Unfortunately, it's a situation we've now got to do something about. And my view on that is that workers in all trade unions, workers who are not in trade unions, need to come together and fight for a new deal for working people in this country. And we need to shift the balance of forces in the world of work.
Faye Jones, isn't this a natural result of neoliberal economics?
Well, I think the fire and rehire tactic in and of itself is completely unacceptable. So I think capitalism is a good thing, so long as it is not allowed to completely run riot or run rampage.
But it is being allowed to run riot. That's the thing here, in that your party is in government. You could do something about this.
We've made it clear that this tactic, this approach is completely unacceptable. We've urged the British Gas to work much more closely with the unions and to meet with the affected employees, which, from what Darren was saying, has not been happening. And Darren, can I say how terribly sorry I am for what you're going through, particularly at this time? I think it's completely unacceptable, and I think there will now be pressure for it to be looked at from a legislative point of view.
Will you be putting pressure on?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly keen to hear from anybody who has had this experience, because I think it's completely wrong that employers are able to treat people in this way. I haven't had anybody approach me yet, but I'd be very keen to talk further and to take those representations to government.
Andrew Pearce.
I just can't stand this, really. We went through all this with British Airways and you thought, that's it. So did British Gas think, well, that was a great PR triumph for British Airways, we'll do the same? Because you just want to vote with your feet. Because some of these people, like Chris, who've worked for British Gas for 30 years. And I know the companies say 98% of engineers accepted this deal. Well, if they didn't accept the deal, they were going to be sacked. So what sort of boast is that? I think it's horrible. It's unacceptable. I can't believe we're all agreeing on all of this yet again. But you know, these people have worked damn hard for this company all their lives, and that's their reward. Thank you and clear off. I hope some of them get together and form their own companies and do well and pinch a load of business from British Gas. And the new chief executive should be hanging his head in shame. He's only been there a year, Chris O'Shea. He complained that his family have had abuse. Well, I wouldn't support that, of course, but it's not a way to run a company in a modern world. It's terrible.
OK, Caroline?
Yeah, I was just reflecting that Boris Johnson had used that phrase. He'd sort of picked it up from the Green Movement and beyond, you know, the fact that after COVID we need to build back better. Well, if he thinks building back better is not acting on this issue of hire and refire, then he's got, you know, a lot of work to do, because, as others have said, it just stinks. And it stinks particularly, I think, when many of these workers will be people who have worked throughout the pandemic, you know, keeping our homes warm and so forth. And to be rewarded in this way, I think is just shameful. We were asked a moment ago to be a little bit more edgy with each other. So I'll be a bit edgy with Faye, just to say, I don't think you need people to come and raise this issue with you. You know what the issue is. You've heard what the issue is. Boris Johnson said that he was against hire and refire, but he's not done anything about it. And so I think that, you know, he needs to step up right now, because this was a once proud company that is treating its workers in an utterly shameful fashion. And the idea that people are going to be made redundant right now of all times after such a difficult year because they won't accept terms and conditions that have been changed outside of their contracts is just plain wrong.
Dave, just very briefly, that there are clearly other companies set to do this as well. I was interviewing Alan Jones from the Press Association earlier, the industrial correspondent. He reckoned there were 7 or 8 other companies. Now, British Airways got away with it. British Gas are clearly going to get away with it. Are you aware of companies maybe in the sector that you cover that are looking to do this?
Well, BT, we're on the brink of a potential dispute with BT. Again, a company that you would think through the pandemic, you know, it stood out there, it's congratulated its workers, key workers, the people who bring broadband to your homes. And then it's embarked on a position of making people compulsory redundant. It's got a transformation program going on. And you know that whilst that hasn't yet directly emerged, you know that company will be looking at what's happened with British Gas, and they will be saying this is a way of, you know, reducing our costs. And the point I keep making on this, and we've got to wake up to this in this country, is that you can't have talk of a levelling up agenda and allow these sort of things to be taking place. You can't rebuild the economy after this pandemic and allow these things to be taking place in the UK today. And I'm totally with Caroline on this. This is not anything that needs any discussion. If Boris Johnson believes in a levelling up agenda, he should be coming to Parliament as soon as he possibly can and banning this practice. And if he can't, well, I mean, my view is we shouldn't be waiting for tackling this as trade unions. We need to come together as trade unions and use our collective power and our solidarity to stop this practice. And
well, if you need the business secretary's mobile phone number, I can supply it to you, Dave, if you want to drop him a text, because we know that that's the way it works at the moment. Darren,
Andrew's going to be joining us on the picket line.
Oh, I'm not sure. Let's not get too carried away.
Darren, obviously a very, very sad day for you. What would you like to say in response to what you've heard?
Just two real quick points. Caroline said about redundancy. We haven't been made redundant. I would take redundancy. We've been fired. It's a completely different thing, and a lot of people get confused with that. We have not been made redundant. We have been fired. The second one is Faye, about that she hasn't had any contact with MPs. I know that at least 6,000 engineers wrote to their MPs because we all asked them to. I'm in a Conservative seat. I'm in Sevenoaks. And my MP replied to my email with a standard generic one, which most of my colleagues got, which again said redundancy is hard. So even the Conservative Party don't realise that it's not redundancy, it's a sacking. And not one Conservative MP made the effort to come to a picket line. Now, I voted Conservative. I will not be voting Conservative again.
Faye, do you want to quickly respond?
Well, I can just say to Darren that I fully understand his frustration. I personally have not been contacted by any British Gas employees. I hadn't seen anything by this afternoon, but I may have something overnight. But, I think what these companies need to realise is that employees are not just workers, they are talent, and they need to be protected and respected. And whilst it's for companies to look at their future structure and that is an appropriate thing to happen, this practice cannot go on. And, I think as Andrew alluded to, the flack that British Airways took quite rightly, it should have been a cautionary tale, I think, to British Gas. And I think there is a real problem here. Sorry, just to say, I think there is a real problem with companies who were former national assets now not behaving in an ethically corporate way will come back to haunt them. And so it should.
OK, thank you very much. We'll take more of your calls in a moment. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. We do have a couple of spaces on the switchboard. You will get through. It's 8:48.
This is LBC. Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Ian Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:52 is the time on LBC. You can text us your questions if you like, 84850. That's what Joe in Romford has done. What do the panel think about care home staff being mandated to receive a coronavirus vaccine? Well, that's the suggestion. I think it's out for consultation. Caroline Lucas, this is quite a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's one where you can see both sides of the argument.
I think it is really difficult, and by and large, I'm certainly not in favour of anyone being forced to have a vaccine. I mean, I think that by and large, what you want to do in terms of encouraging uptake and so forth is around education, is around understanding why people might be hesitant and dealing with those concerns. But on balance, actually, when it came to care homes, I think I've talked myself into the position, although I'll be interested in hearing what everyone else has to say. I think there is such a duty of care in that particular position that I think I probably would have sympathy with the idea of saying that care home workers should be vaccinated. I was looking to see, for example, that there's a kind of a precedent, I guess, when you're looking at certain surgeons who are doing certain operations and have to have a Hep B injection because otherwise they're putting other people's lives at risk. And I think that issue of putting other people's lives at risk is one that weighs heavily. So on balance, I'm minded in that area, but I recognise hugely the issues around civil liberties, the issues around, around the fact that if it's going to be applied retrospectively, then what does that mean to someone who's currently in that job? Obviously, you've got to make exceptions for people who can't have vaccines for medical reasons or because they're pregnant or for any other reason. So it is a minefield. I really do recognise that. And there would need to be an awful lot of safeguards in place. But as I say at the moment, at the beginning of this discussion, I'm coming down rather more in favour of saying yes, but by the end of it, I might have changed my mind.
Well, it's quite refreshing, actually, to hear a politician having these sort of inner conflicts, because I think this is one issue where it's impossible to really be definitive, I think. Dave Ward, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I think I would agree broadly with what Caroline has said. I was talking to my brother-in-law who actually works in a care home, and he was saying to me that, he thought it was fundamentally wrong. He was saying how he got into a little bit of conflict at times with some of the people in the home who were starting to suggest this. But I suppose the more that the evidence suggests that people's lives are going to be at risk, you have to do something. I would like to think that the testing, I think he has to have a test pretty much every day before he goes into work, rapid flow test. I assume that's what's happening in most care homes. I would like to think that could be used before you got to a mandatory situation. And I think you have to review it. But look, it is a really, really difficult one because, can't afford more people dying.
I mean, care homes, I think we can all understand the argument. Pimlico plumbers have called for all of their staff to be vaccinated. Where do you stand on that?
Me, you're asking me?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's justified at all. There's not many things that I agree with when I hear the guy from Pimlico Plumbers talking. So that would be another thing I don't agree with him on. I just think sometimes, you have to look at the rights of individuals here, our civil liberties. And there's no doubt that if we followed this to the way some people are suggesting, you would see more discrimination. You've got the situation where young people are not at a point where they can have the vaccine at the moment. You've got people who, for legitimate reasons, can't have it. I just don't think it's the right approach at this point in time.
OK. Faye?
Well, I'm wrestling with it in the same way that Caroline is. But
I think you two should join your own party or form your own party.
Maybe. No, I find it difficult to reconcile from a civil liberties point of view. All the way along, we've been asked to support some quite severe restrictions on our liberties, and we've done that in the name of in the face of a greater evil. But the Ben Franklin quote about temporarily giving up liberty in pursuit of safety, comes back to play on my mind. But I know this is something that the care sector has requested. They have come to the Department for Health and Social Care to say that this is something they're keen on. I know not everybody is in favour, and I think it's really important that we do as much as we can in terms of educating and hopefully with the number of care staff that we're talking about, we would be able to do that. But overall, on balance, yes, I think in terms of the wider public health priority, it's something that we should look at.
Andrew?
I've wrestled with it, and I have an outcome. I think they have to do it, I'm afraid. I understand all the civil liberties arguments, but ultimately what matters most here, people in care homes who live in care homes are often amongst our most vulnerable. They're often very old, they're infirm, they may have underlying health issues, and you cannot, in my view, expose them to somebody coming into the home to care for them, to wash them, to feed them, to change their bed, who may have COVID. It could have a lethal effect in the entire care home. We know that because that's what happened when people were being shipped out of NHS hospitals into care homes at the start of this wretched pandemic, and they weren't being tested for COVID. So I understand people want to express concern and civil liberties, but I'm afraid most of all, you put people in care homes because that's what it says on the tin, to care for them. And you can't care for them properly in a pandemic unless the care home staff have been fully vaccinated. And if the care home staff get vaccinated, that might encourage the other people who are reluctant to get on and do it, because we want everybody to be vaccinated.
OK, for 1 week only, we are extending Cross Question until 9:15, so still time to get your questions in to Dave Ward, Caroline Lucas, Faye Jones and Andrew Pearce. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. I'm Ian Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, a powerful Commons committee is to start its own investigation into the collapse of Greensill Capital. The Treasury Committee inquiry joins a lawyer-led review commissioned after revelations about David Cameron's lobbying came to light. MPs have rejected a Labour plan for a wider parliamentary inquiry into political lobbying. Earlier, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer was scathing, though, about the government.
The Greensill scandal is just the tip of the iceberg. Dodgy contracts, privileged access, jobs for their mates. This is the return of Tory sleaze.
Whitehall departments have also been told to identify any senior civil servants holding other paid jobs. Programme Director at the Institute for Government, who's also a former civil servant in the Cabinet Office, Alex Thomas, told LBC that there is a potential conflict.
This is a balance. I don't think there's an absolute 100% right or wrong. You must be sort of a pure, separate civil servant or, a minister only serving the public good, and you must never kind of interact with the private sector or be lobbied. And that can bring value to the political system, to policy choices. It's really important that ministers hear from a variety of voices, and the civil service builds up its kind of commercial skills from the private sector.
More than 80 British universities have been named by students anonymously sharing experiences of sexual harassment and abuse. A number of institutions have been mentioned more than 50 times in reports of the Everyone's Invited website. Some 15,000 testimonies have now been posted, prompting an Ofsted review of safeguarding in schools. The Foreign Secretary says the UK will support an orderly departure of British forces from Afghanistan. Dominic Raab's been responding to the announcement of NATO withdrawing its roughly 7,000 military troops from the country after 20 years. NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg says the alliance had no other option.
We face a dilemma because the alternative to leaving in an orderly fashion is to be prepared for a long-term, open-ended military commitment with potentially more NATO troops.
Earlier, US President Joe Biden decided to start withdrawing all American troops from Afghanistan from May the 1st. Union bosses are criticising the idea of mandatory coronavirus jabs for care home workers in England, which the government is currently consulting on. The GMB claims the sector is being used as a guinea pig for forced vaccinations. And a strike by bus drivers in parts of London set to go ahead tomorrow after talks over pay and conditions ended without agreement. Members of Unite, employed by London United, will walk out for 24 hours. The firm operates routes mostly in the west and southwest of the capital. The LBC Markets report the FTSE 100 closed up 49 points at 69.39. The pound is $1.37 and €1.15. LBC weather, another dry and chilly night for many, a low of -1 degree. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Serena Farrow.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ian Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's Ian Dale with Cross Question, a specially extended Cross Question tonight because of my lengthy questions to Alex Salmond, that interview overran a little bit. So we thought we'd give our panel a bit more of a chance to have their full say in Cross Question tonight. Dave Ward is with us, General Secretary of the Communications Workers Union. Caroline Lucas is Green MP for Brighton Pavilion. Faye Jones is Conservative MP for Brecon and Radnorshire. And Andrew Pearce is LBC presenter and Associate Editor at the Daily Mail. John is in Camden. Hello, John.
Hello.
Hello. What would you like to ask?
With 100,000 complaints to the BBC about the coverage of the death of Duke of Edinburgh, is the monarchy as popular as we would like to think or have led to believe?
Well, as our royal correspondent in residence, Andrew Pearce, I'm coming to you first on that.
Yes, I'll be talking about this quite a lot on Saturday, if you know. Look, he was by the Queen's side for 73 years, Prince Philip. I think the broadcasters did a great job. You could argue perhaps some of the coverage should have been reserved for the news channels, BBC News 24, whatever it's called now, Sky News. But actually, if people didn't like it, they could turn off, they could turn over. They could turn on to LBC. Oh, actually, you've got quite a lot of it on LBC too. I'm not worried about 115,000 people complaining to the BBC. There's 60, 70 million people in this country. I think the monarchy is as popular as ever. And I think the outpouring of affection we've seen for Prince Philip and some of the stuff we've read and learned about him in the last days, he was really far more remarkable figure than I thought he was, actually. So, no, I think the monarchy's strong, popular, and is going very well. And I think there's a huge outpouring of affection for the Queen, and who's lost a very important part of her life, probably the most important thing in her life. 73 years, imagine being with someone for 73 years and then they're gone. Can't imagine it.
I've managed 26 so far, so I think I'm doing quite well.
Yeah, but John Sales feels like 3 years.
Thank you, Andrew. When I was on Friday night after you, we got the news that the Daily Mail had 144 pages of royal coverage on Saturday. I joked that you had probably written about 142 of them. Yeah. I mean, didn't the newspapers go over the top as well?
No, because we sold, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but we sold an awful lot more copies, over 100,000 more copies that day. People will keep those newspapers because of the photographic sections, the pull-out sections. It's a souvenir. It's part of history. The Queen and Prince Philip have been with us for so long. Most people who are alive in this country have never known anything else but them.
That's true. Caroline Lucas, I know you're gagging to answer this question.
Well, I was going to just reflect that I think even fairly avid monarchists might think that BBC went slightly over the top, because when Andrew said that people could just swap channels, well, actually on the BBC they certainly couldn't, because on every single BBC channel they cleared everything. And I quite understand clearing one of the channels. Of course, it's a momentous occasion, whatever your views on the monarchy. It's a huge moment in the life of the country, as well as being an absolute, tragedy for the Queen, and so of course I recognise that there's going to be a lot of coverage, but I did think the BBC did go somewhat over the top by clearing absolutely every single channel, and I'm not surprised that there was quite a lot of complaints about it.
Okay, Faye.
Well, I should say I am an ardent monarchist. I used to work for the royal family. I am a huge.
Did you? What did you do?
My first job out of university. I was a researcher to the Prince of Wales. So I worked in the attic of Clarence House, which they had converted into proper offices. It wasn't awful, but I occasionally got to meet the Duke of Edinburgh and other members of the royal family, and I was it was terribly sad news in a way that we were all expecting, but we were still very shocked. And so I watched a lot of the coverage on Friday, and I thought it was lovely to see so many different people sharing their experiences of getting to know the Duke over his incredible time as Her Majesty's consort. And it has been wonderful learning over the last week the different things that he did and things he's responsible for. The debate that we had in Parliament on Monday afternoon was really enlightening. But the BBC is always going to be in a really difficult position because they would have got 100,000 complaints saying they didn't show enough respect to the Queen if they had, devoted one channel to something else. So I think they were in a difficult position and they got it right. I thought the coverage was appropriate and very interesting.
Do you have a Duke of Edinburgh anecdote that you can relate?
Well, one that doesn't reflect very well on me. I went to a Christmas party and I was stood with my colleagues, and for some strange reason, everybody happened to be very tall. I was the shortest person there. And the Duke of Edinburgh came over to me and said, "You didn't make it onto the basketball team then?" Because these girls were so much taller than me, and I'm sat down right now, but I'm really quite small. He was absolutely charming and funny, and in my contribution to the debate on Monday, I talked about his staff who will miss him dreadfully, and of course they're not able to go to the funeral on Saturday and pay their respects, but they will miss him dreadfully because he was wonderful to work for.
That is a great anecdote. I don't know, Dave Ward, if you ever met the Duke, if you can top that.
Do you know what? I did actually once, when Royal Mail had an event to celebrate 500 years. But I didn't have any of them stories to tell. We all stood in a line and we shook hands at some point. But look, you wouldn't be human, I think, if you didn't feel sympathy for the Queen, for the family. It triggers an emotion that you remember about your own loved ones. And the point about 73 years as a couple, as partners, is incredible, really, when you consider that. I say to my wife sometimes, we're on 41 years, and I say we're on the home stretch. And I've realised by those standards, we're only halfway through the course, just over. I did think that some of it was over the top. And I do think you need to have a bit of balance in this debate because, I'm not sort of sure that, when we talk about leading a life of public service, which undoubtedly he did, but I think there's a lot harder ways to lead a life of public service. And I'm thinking of people like nurses, our emergency service workers, who, I think we could balance the debate out a little bit. So look, I'm not a big fan of the monarchy, but I do get the sympathy that was shown. I felt a little bit of it myself, if I'm being honest, yes. But I think it was over the top, and I think you need to have the opportunity to be able to say that at times. There must be millions and millions of people, I disagree with Andrew on this, who don't relate to the lives of the monarchy, who younger people in particular, I would imagine, are wondering what it's all about to some extent. I think life's changed, and I think the coverage was overall a bit over the top.
I've got to ask Andrew and Caroline if you have any Duke of Edinburgh anecdotes you wish to share with us. If not, we'll move on.
I just feel like I need to make one up quickly, but no, I'm afraid I don't. I did give my speech in Parliament about the environment, and because again, whatever one's, I'm not a great monarchist either, but I do recognise that he was ahead of his time on many environment issues, and he recognised, for example, the reality of climate change back in 1982, which was well before many other people did. And he had a real impatience about wanting action on the environment. And I related to that as well. He gave a really great talk back in 1970, I think, to some conference in Strasbourg on pollution, basically saying there's no good you all just sitting around talking about it. You've got to go out there and do something. And too right, 50 years ago. And
Andrew, very, very quickly.
I tell you, I met him at Windsor Castle. There was a reception for the media. The Queen and Prince Philip hosted it to try to encourage more interest in the Queen's Diamond Jubilee or Golden Jubilee. Forgive me, I've forgotten which one it was. And Prince Philip came charging over. We all had our little name tags on. I was working for the Times, but he spotted 2 reporters there from the Independent and he barked at them. You work for the Independent. You're a Republican newspaper. Why are you at my party? To which they said, look, sir, you invited us. To which he said, but you didn't have to bloody well come. And then he said, and I see you're drinking my wine. Don't drink too much of it. And off he went. And they were lost for words, which is the effect I think he has on many people.
Indeed. John, very quickly, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, on a human level, I'm sorry for the loss, but I think we do need to get rid of the monarchy. I mean, who would have thought 5 years ago 17 million people would have voted to leave the EU? And I do wonder, actually, out of the royals, who would actually stand for an elected president or head of state? And to be honest with you, I mean, Andrew Pearce writes for a newspaper that gets exercised over unemployed people having Sky subscriptions. Yet it's perfectly happy for us to work out fingers to the bone to pay for council palaces.
We do. I think we do.
Oh, I'm not going to get into an argument. I'm not going to get into an argument on that one. Thank you, John. Let's quickly go to Ben. Sorry, Andrew. Let's go to Ben in Haringey. Ben, what would you like to ask?
Yes, I've always believed, I was a trade union, lay trade union leader in a large council in London, and I've always believed that political parties should not have lobbyists aggravating them all the time, and they're looking over their shoulder about getting finance from these people. And big business and trade unions should not be in the position where they can say, well, we're going to withdraw your funds if you don't do
Ben,
what
we need a question.
Well, I believe that... do you believe...
No, I don't know. Let's have a question.
As a panel, do you believe that the government exchequer should support political parties instead of...
Okay, so should there be state funding of political parties rather than how they're funded at the moment? We are running out of time, so I'm going to just ask you for 45 seconds each. Faye?
No, I wouldn't support that. I don't think that's an appropriate use of public funds. And again, I go back to the point that we were making earlier on. Lobbying in and of itself is a good thing. It has to be done properly and appropriately, which is what this independent review is going to look at. And I think it's really important that we increase access, open access, that everybody is able to talk to government ministers and members of parliament. We should have better lobbying.
Andrew?
You just think of some of the stupid slogans that political parties have come up at general elections over the years, and it would really stick in people's craw to think their hard-earned taxes have paid for that. So no, I know the way political funding isn't raised isn't ideal, but putting it onto the taxpayer is much less ideal.
Caroline?
Yeah, I'm pretty amazed by that answer, to be honest. I mean, you know, this is a country that likes to pride itself on its democracy, that sends people into battle to fight for democracy, and yet isn't prepared to say that each person could have £1 on their tax each year to fund political parties. I think it's much more dangerous to have the opposite, which is basically never quite being clear what money is being given to which party for what end. I think it would be a way of cleaning up politics. We started this whole discussion talking about corruption in politics and sleaze, and I think we're ending it as well. I think state funding for political parties is both a fair thing to do, and it would be a way of cleaning up politics too.
Dave?
I think there is a case for state funding of political parties. I think Caroline just made it. But it's not going to happen at the moment or in any time soon.
Gently.
So in the absence of that, I think it needs to be done in the most democratic, transparent way. And I'll come back to the answer that, you know, if every organisation and every business had to face the regulation that trade unions do to enter this debate, then it would be a fairer system.
Right, final quick text question from Alexa in Edinburgh. Boris Johnson quoted Line of Duty in Prime Minister's questions today with reference to bent coppers. Who is your favourite TV copper? And I don't know what we should, the conclusions we'll draw from your answers. Andrew, you look as if you've got one ready.
No, she just got killed. So I forgot. Nicola Walker played that lovely copper in that series on ITV until a few weeks ago. So she got killed. So I'm devastated. So I haven't got a favourite copper now.
We'll have to clue who you're talking about.
Unforgotten.
Okay, it was great.
Watch that. I don't know because I haven't seen it. Faye Jones.
I would have said Ted Hastings, but that's too obvious an answer. But I can't remember the name of the character, but it was Happy Valley on the BBC. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And it's really annoying me that I can't remember the name of the actress or the character, but the policewoman in that, she was fantastic. You wouldn't mess with her.
Caroline.
Well, I'm afraid the deduction you're going to draw is that I don't watch many police dramas because I'm really scraping the barrel here. So I'm going to go for a detective and stick with Morse. But I'm sorry, I'm just not up to speed with the other ones.
Oh, my partner's addicted to that. Every night I get home, he's got ITV3 on an old episode of Morse. God, Dave Ward.
Sarah Lancashire. She was the actress.
Yes.
But I'm actually going to agree with Andrew.
Raquel from Coronation Street.
Yeah, Raquel.
I'm going to agree with Andrew on this one.
Oh, no.
I thought Nicola Walker was brilliant in that programme.
Okay. Well, I think all four of you have been brilliant for the last hour and 15 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. Caroline Lucas, Dave Ward, Faye Jones and Andrew Pearce. Don't forget you can catch up with old editions of Cross Question or indeed this one on the Cross Question podcast, or you can revisit on Global Player. In a moment, we're going to be talking about autism and how autistic adults and children have coped with autism during the pandemic. It's 18 minutes past 9.
This is LBC.